All right, so in this lecture, we're going to talk about an important concept called choosing a medical school specialty. So I know you're probably thinking, well, I just want to get into medical school. Why do I have to care about your medical specialty? I can understand that perspective for sure, but I think it's also important to have this in mind. You don't have to be actionable on this course, but I think it would be in your best interest to be aware of the financial principles associated. So, for instance, I think to kind of introduce the concept, we have to think about lost pharmacy income. And choosing a particular medical school specialty, down the line is going to be very important to kind of making sure that you get out of this process with a stronger financial perspective. So, for instance, I guess to kind of sum it up, is this process worth it financially? Because you are going to be foregoing a lot of potential income as a pharmacist. The same principle applies to other non-traditional applicants, but I'm going to use pharmacy because that's my background specifically. Also, pharmacy, as we know, is a relatively high-paying specialty, so going to medical school, you need to make sure that you're going to be able to make back that lost income. I refer to this principle as the pharmacy opportunity cost. So let's go over some of the numbers here that we have on the screen. So median pharmacist pay was reported at $128,000 annual versus a bachelor's, which I just referred to as a generic traditional pre-med, who gets out of school with a biology degree and works, and they could make on average around $48,000 a year. So we'll just keep that number in mind for a little bit. But so for each year that you attend pharmacy or attend medical school, you are foregoing that $128,000 annual income. And for purposes to keep things simple, we're going to avoid doing tax calculations and all that stuff, just the raw numbers up front, just to kind of emphasize the point I'm trying to get across. So, and we'll also assume that you have an average pharmacy debt of $163,000, which is pretty standard, as well as the average medical school debt, which is a new number we haven't introduced before, and that's around $215,000. I think it's almost higher at this point now. So putting those two numbers together, just with your debt of going to medical school and pharmacy school, you're sitting at close to $400,000 in just overall debt from tuition, living expenses, and so on. You then have to factor in the lost amount of, your opportunity cost of going to medical school. So not only do you have added debt, but you also are lacking that potential income, that $128,000 for the amount of years you're in medical school, which is 4, and then 2 to 3 years for residency at a minimum. And a lot of people will come and say, well, isn't the minimum 3 years for residency? And that's correct in the U.S., but for individuals who are in Canada, I'm under the impression that you can actually do a specialty in family medicine with 2 years of residency. So we'll give some of the numbers the benefit of the doubt and say maybe you're from Canada and you're doing residency up there and it's only 2 years. So that 6 years of opportunity cost comes out to $772,000. Add all of that debt together, opportunity cost of lost income plus the cost of tuition and your debt, which doesn't include any of the interest rates, which is a whole nother beast to unpack. You're sitting at basically a net loss of $1 million in some change, which is pretty significant. So with that in mind, you can sit here and kind of tabulate the numbers, but at the end of the day, you're pretty broke when it comes to making a decision to go to medical school. So right here we have a quick example to kind of emphasize that point and why choosing a medical specialty is going to be important to breaking ends meet at the end of the day. So for the column on the left side, the average income for a family physician, so primary care, is $234,000 a year, give or take, depending on region and all that stuff. This is obviously pre-tax. So, your residencies are 2 to 3 years, which you can factor in was the opportunity cost we calculated on the previous page. So you'll recognize this negative $1.151 million. That is basically your starting point the day you start, your first day of attending salary. And chipping away at that, assuming you contribute 100% of your income to your, loss into your loans, you'll see as it slowly, each year that you're attending, it chips away at it. So it takes about 5 years, assuming perfect case scenario, and this is obviously way too optimistic. it'll take you 5 years at a minimum to get to like positive income based off of those principles. Versus if you decide to be a orthopedic surgeon, they have a little bit longer of a training period, 5 years. Most of them will even consider doing fellowships afterwards to further specialize into hand or something along those lines. But we'll say five. We'll keep it simple at 5 years. So their average income is around $500,000 a year, which is pretty substantial. So you can pretty much appreciate the simple example that the more money you make as an attending, the faster you're going to get your money back from going down this long path. And you can see how quickly it multiplies down the line. Just at year 5, you're already far net positive. And this is probably a little too oversimplistic, but it's just here to emphasize the point that you have to be considerate of what specialty you're going into, to consider the financial options. So I have here just another chart that kind of demonstrates the amount of school, the opportunity cost for pharmacists, and compares it to like a biology major, because that's why we brought up that example in the first place. So you can see, your 4 years of medical school leads to, an opportunity cost of lost income here, $200,000 versus $500,000, which is pretty significant. It also then depends on the years of residency you plan on doing. So you can look at that and see each year that you basically add to your residency training is another, additional amount of lost income that you could have made as a pharmacist. Granted, the more years you specialize and do residency, the more money you can generally make. As you can see, like at the bottom, like neurosurgery. These are just some examples. You might not be super familiar with what you want to do at the moment, but just to kind of put it into perspective of how many years and how kind of net loss you'll have. At the far end of the spectrum, just 9 years, which is usually neurosurgery plus a year or two fellowship or cardiothoracic surgery, something like that. You are basically at an opportunity cost of like $1.6 million of lost pharmacy income, and that doesn't even include your loans. You're net negative $2 million. Granted, if you go into something that specialized, you'll be okay at the end of the day because they make over $1 million a year, but just something to think about when it comes to, when are you going to fully get to the other side of, I guess, the potential money that you're losing by going to medical school. So some key things I want to reinforce. No, you shouldn't choose your specialty off of these considerations alone. I think it's just important to highlight, but you still need to do what you're passionate about, because that's all that matters at the end of the day. You're obviously going to medical school because you're passionate about medicine. So, don't stop there. If there are two specialties that you love, then you should probably go with the one that pays better, because you'll obviously be able to make more money down the line. And if they're equally valued to you, then just go with that, because it'll help you recover financially. Again, be aware of the opportunity cost that we've discussed in this lecture and the downside costs of foregoing that 6-figure income. So that is the end of this lecture, and we will move on to the next.